Welcome back to Up Close. In our first segment, we talked about New York City's campaign to try to save lives on the street. This next segment, it's about the same thing, only a little different. This one's not about cutting the number of lives lost from cars on the street. This segment is about cutting the number of lives lost from living on the street. The book is called Passage, the story of a young black man trying to survive in a world where there are indeed forks in the road at every turn. For many young African-American men, it's called life. The author, Khary Lazarre-White, is here. And welcome. Great to meet you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You can write. I know you're going to talk about all your community activity and your social worker and social advocate and all that stuff, but you can really write. This is an amazing book. What a great read. I really
appreciate that.
What did it feel like to write a book? After all your years running a nonprofit organization, we're going to get to that in a second. What was it like to all of a sudden, I know you've written a lot,
right,
but never a novel.
Never a novel. You know, I've written essays and personal kind of comments on the world and on society, and it felt very different to produce a novel, a piece of art, something that really came from inside me. It felt like a story that I had to tell, and it's very different, I think, to work through the medium of a novel, to really try to tell a story that will connect to other people and either affirm their experience or illuminate for people who are not familiar with the experience.
For our viewers who have not yet read the book, give it in 30 seconds, what's the nutshell of the book?
It's a story of a young man coming of age in 1993. He's surrounded by deep family love, a mother and a father who mean a tremendous amount to him and provide guidance. And yet every day that he closes his front door, he walks into streets that are inundated with violence, with drugs, with racism, with poor schooling. And he has to figure out which voices to listen to, how to navigate the world, and how to come out the other side.
I've heard you speak through the magic of videotape and doing research about you. And many of the themes that you talk about and are like, you know, right here at all times in your speeches, you know, you touched on those in the book. And yet what was different was that you tapped a different side of yourself as an artist by really going into someone's head that was quite personal and quite so intimate that it's going to be surprising to people who have only known you as a social activist.
I think that we don't hear enough the inner journey and the story of young men in general, of young black men specifically. I wanted to bring the reader into that journey and into that narrative to immediately bring you into the psyche. What are the dreams and the visions? What are the experiences of a young black man in this city? How does he see the world? How does he experience his school and his family and police and the streets of the city of New York? Not from a sociological perspective, not from a legal perspective, but from a very internal narrative. And I think that's the power of a novel, that it can bring you into another experience. It can bring you into a journey that's maybe not yours, but again, it illuminates a world for you. And that's the power of art, to speak to an experience. And so it was really important to me to bring in this journey onto the page.
And what, do you have an audience, or was it just you want to just get this out and whoever listens to it could listen to it? Because you have an African-American constituency, you also have a Caucasian constituency, you have other ethnic minority constituencies. Who did you write this for?
I think first, when you write a first novel, there's an element of writing it for yourself. It's a story that you feel you need to tell. It's a story that I don't feel I've read before, and so I felt that I needed to put it down on paper. Part of it is about my story. There's elements of me in the main character in Warrior and elements of him in my journey. But I also truly believe that what art does is open up conversations. You know, if I'm inspired by the story of, you know, Holden Caulfield, of a white boy who's living in a rural environment, and that resonates with me, or Maxine Hong Kingston's story of an Asian girl who's coming of age, and that resonates with me. If I still read Moby Dick every other year because Melville's story is so powerful, or whether I read Toni Morrison, these are very different narratives, and yet they all speak to a part of me. And so I hope that people read Passage widely. I certainly hope that young black men see their experience in Warrior, see their story being told, and that it resonates with them. But I also hope that people who are not familiar with this experience in this incredible city of New York, it's still so profoundly segregated. It has among the most segregated school system in the United States.
People don't realize that. I think a lot of people do not realize
New York is consistently among the top 3 most segregated school systems in the United States of America.
How does that happen? When our neighborhoods, you know, are oftentimes diverse, in those same neighborhoods you have segregated schools. How does that happen?
Now, I think that education is the preeminent civil rights issue of our time, on a national level and certainly on a local level as well. there is usually not enough focus put on what we really have to do to comprehensively transform our educational system. We know what it means to educate children. We know what it means to create good schools. There has not been the political will to do it. I think you've seen that in successive administrations on a federal level, on a state level, and also on a municipal level. And so what you allow is the experiences to continue. You allow for schools to continue to be segregated without breaking them up sufficiently. You don't have the kind of leadership that we need in place to ensure that all schools are good. If New York City has a 1.2 million student body, and you allow it to be segregated in that way, what you allow is an educational caste system. You allow some parents who can navigate this unbelievably complicated system to find good schools, and others who can't navigate that system, who then are sending their children to the schools that are the most segregated and the most poorly performing.
When Rudy Giuliani left office, the graduation rate was 50%. It is now 76%. Has that stayed true for all contingencies and constituencies? Has that stayed true for blacks, for Hispanics, for whites, or are blacks still lower than that 76%?
Oh, certainly. That's an aggregate. So you have certain communities where you have a graduation rate in upwards of the high 90s, and you have other communities, such as in Harlem, where the graduation rate, for instance, for black boys hovers around 45%.
Right, and what's the alternative if you don't have a high school education? You can work at McDonald's, or you can go into something underground, right?
Well, there have definitely been increases in the educational system in terms of graduation, which we need to celebrate and continue to aggressively move forward, but they're still wholly insufficient. And one of the things that's hidden within that number of graduation rate is how are children being prepared. So the graduation rate in all too many of our schools is an 8th grade level education. So even though they get a diploma, they're not really being able to prepare.
Still only 1 out of 3 are prepared for college.
That's
so
right.
You're kind of warrior in your book passage. That's the lead character. There's a lot of you in Warrior, right?
It's art. There's a lot of me in Warrior. There's a lot that's not about my experience and that's imagined and brought in, but there's certainly a lot of me in Warrior. Yes.
An eye-opening book. As I read it, I thought you were talking to anyone who wants to read it, and anyone can see something out of that. Really, it's so nice to meet you. You're a great activist, and a long-time activist. The Brotherhood Sister Soul is your organization, and we'll talk about that. Will you come back another time?
Sounds good. Absolutely. I'd love to. Thank you for having me.
Khary Lazarre-White, really good to meet you. Good luck with the book.
I appreciate it.
Coming up, continue our discussion about kids and our future. It's not just a cliche, it's a definition really of who we are, because there's an entire slice of the population for whom success is but a pipe dream. So how can we help lift those kids who by the time they're in puberty have lost so much of their hope? A famous doctor from New York now trying to tackle this problem, and we talk to him next.